Oh, today on the show we have Eben Meyer. If you have been a good and consistent listener of this podcast, you know that Eben is one of the partner companies of this podcast, and he runs CleanTech Growth Lab, which do go to market for clean tech companies. He is a wealth of information about how to do these things correctly, how to think about customers, think about sales, think about marketing. And we are doing a series of episodes running through uh, how to most optimally move from Series A to Series B. The concepts we cover in this episode apply to most any company in any stage, but specifically his work recently has been with Series A to Series B. So very informative conversation. I learned a lot. There's a lot that I will be applying to my own business, this podcast itself. I know that you'll get a lot from it as well. Thanks as always to CleanTech Growth Lab and also Craze and Friends, the producer of this show. With that, I give you Yevon. Oh, welcome to another episode of The Grove. Shout out to our sponsors, Craze and Friends. And again, we got CleanTech Growth Lab on the pod. What's up, Yevon? Welcome back.
Hey, Blake. Good to chat to you. Good to be back. Lots to talk about, lots happening. Been loving these conversations with you, man.
That's right. So this is episode 2 in a series that we're doing together. Last episode, we expected to walk through a number of things, but really got deep in why customer acquisition cost is structurally higher in climate tech. Very interesting conversation for me, but it left me thinking, now what? We have this truth, and what do we do with it? And so your answer to that is buying signals. So I just want to get right into it. Let's lay the foundation for someone that's not familiar. How do we make sense of what buying signals are and in the landscape of high customer acquisition?
Yeah, I mean, I guess buying signals is going to be one of those things that everyone's pushing like a silver bullet of some kind. It's very fashionable right now. You can go online, you can see lots of people talking about these. And some are better than others. And I think maybe the best way to think about signals is if we have this information on hand, if we have these kinds of signals to work with, what does it change about the way that we organize very limited resources, both for sales and for marketing? So it would be cool today to chat through some examples of, what would you do with this versus without it? And then what would those like two realities look like? And then given the potential for the reality to get better, what can you then, knowing that you have access to this information, what can you do with it? And how should you allocate your resource? Yeah, I don't know. Probably a very helpful metaphor that really helps me fix this in my head is to think of it as like you as an organization, you're helping people, right? So you're almost like a medical room, you're like a waiting room in a hospital, and you have this salesperson who would be the expert practitioner. This is the doctor, this is the person that can save lives. You have the nurse who's going out to try and find who needs the most urgent help. And then you have the waiting room, which keeps everyone, protected in ambient care. Maybe there's a comfortable place for them to recline. Maybe there's some information on the walls. There's some beautiful music, keeping everyone kind of calm and happy. And you can see that as marketing. Like marketing is warming up the space for you. It's providing that education. But really the truth is that not everyone in that room needs to see the surgeon or needs to see the doctor. And really the trick is finding which people there in your ICP, which ones really need the urgent care immediately. And if you see it like that, now you can see, okay, there's a new reality where the doctor doesn't need to treat everyone in the room immediately. They just need to focus on the person that has the biggest stab wound and they're bleeding out and they need help. And they need to, prioritize these people.
Interesting. So just a little bit further on that analogy, but from the perspective of running a company, it does happen, and it's a very fortunate opportunity when you do have a problem that is like a doctor's office where people are coming to you and they say, "Hey, I know I have this issue and I need to solve it and I need to see you to do it." But oftentimes, uh, e- especially in climate tech, we're selling into a market where you're solving an issue that people don't know they have or know that there's a better way to do it. So in that analogy, I guess in that space, that warm room, it's almost like everybody is there but doesn't necessarily know that they need to see the doctor maybe. So somebody needs to come
Yeah,
out and say, "Hey, by the way, you know, you do have this problem." And then they say, "Oh, okay, let me go see the doctor."
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Right.
Like maybe you're in wastewater treatment, and like you know that you have aging infrastructure. That's fine, right? You know that that's something that you struggle with, and you know that you're working with old equipment, and you do feel the pain, but there's not enough push. There's not enough of a catalyst, right, to get you there. And I think that if we use that example, then really what you're looking for is an EPA enforcement action notice. So the facility who's sitting on that old equipment, they were previously uncomfortable, but when you get this notice saying, okay, there's a regulatory body, it said that you're not in compliance, you have a defined timeline to fix it, it's not so vague anymore. It becomes something that's got a date, it's got a time, and there starts to become some kind of mobilization happening with that organization, right? They're starting to prepare to react to the reality that's been pushed on them. And that's a totally different position to one that just has old infrastructure to one that has a huge compliance action.
Perfect transition because you said something you almost like a little foreshadowing, so good job. Last episode where you said a lot of people look at things like hiring as buying signals, and it's useful data, but they're not necessarily buying signals in the way that would be useful to think about it for our context. So can you elaborate on that?
Sorry, can you repeat the question so I understand it properly?
Yeah. So last episode you had said something interesting, which is hiring data, for example, people use as buying signals, but it's not necessarily a buying signal. It's just it's inference on what could be happening inside of a company. A lot of intent data from companies like I think Pendo or something like that, where they give you all this information about what people are doing on your website. That's just inference data. So it's very different
Right.
from the opportunity we have in climate tech where a lot of the buying signals and the levers are compliance and they're driven by regulatory environments that are publicly available. And so I just wanted you to elaborate on what you meant there because it's kind of a new perspective on buying signals relative to how I thought about them before our conversation.
Right. Yeah, and because it's there are all kinds of buying signals as well. Like you could see them in like there's a gold, a silver, a bronze, and I would say maybe a hiring signal is it's a great like bronze signal because yeah, if you're hiring for someone whose job it is to improve the analytics of your energy optimization, like yes, there's down the line there's going to be investment in this, that matches the hire, but you don't know what the timeline is, and I think that's the biggest challenge with that signal is like it's still fuzzy, it's still not clear. Um, and to contrast that, the buying signals that we want to look at are the ones that essentially have a timeline baked into them. So if there's a timeline, you can work back from that timeline. Like let's say with the wastewater treatment, right? So you have a discharge, there's PFAS contaminants, it's above the threshold. Based on the law, you know that they're going to be given 18 months to fix it, and then you can start to work back from that. If there's a legal deadline there, they need to start doing vendor requirements and vendor sourcing in the first 3 months of receiving this knock. And so that's something that you can work with, not just from a timing perspective, but also from a context perspective, right? So if you've read the news, you've read um, the official filings, you can learn a lot about their position. And if they're here, you can see that they need to get there, and you have that in specific detail. So when you go to them, you're no longer saying like, "Hey, here's my product, here's what we do." you can go straight to them and speak to their context and say, hey, I just saw this happened. Typically what we've seen is in the market in the next 60 days, this is what needs to happen. These are some of the challenges that people in your position have to navigate. We are working with other people that have been through this exact process. Can we share with you some of those examples? So you're being much more consultative because you have that context to have a more valuable conversation, right? Instead of having to pitch them something.
Yeah, so in practice, you mentioned, how to do this would be, and I have it written, split awareness, between sales activations, split yeah, what does this mean? So split between awareness and sales activations, between ICP and signals?
Right. Okay. Yeah. That's a good distinction because it's really about the specialization of what each of those two teams are trying to do. So if you don't know who's hot and who's not, right? If you assume the whole market is equal, you're going to do marketing to them that's attempting to convert some of them, and you're hoping for the best, and that's that's an inefficiency because they're simply not there to buy, right? So what marketing in a perfect world would be doing is it would be flagging the ones that are able to move further in a conversation. And for everyone else, what it's focusing on is it's focusing on that awareness, that engagement, getting people thinking about these things and giving them ways to self-help themselves until they can no longer self-help. So marketing is, providing that kind of content that's valuable enough that they're navigating, they're understanding, maybe they're deepening their understanding of the problem, which then leaves you with sales on the other side. So sales would typically, again, try and knock on doors, create relationships, create inroads with these individuals, not knowing whether or not they're actually able to have that conversation. But if you can free sales up to only focus on that 3%, the conversation is much more. It's much more focused. So you're not trying to. I think often what SDR teams are trying to do, where there's no awareness, is they're trying to do that whole thing, right? They're trying to break in with the relationship, form some kind of personal connection with the person, and in that process, you're trying to create trust, which really marketing should have been doing as well, right? Marketing should have been creating that brand awareness. So if you can specialize, then each of those functions can get really good at what they're supposed to be doing, rather than marketing trying to do both or sales trying to do both of which are very inefficient.
I mean, do you see that happening often where, companies are conflating sales and marketing? So this is something that's, specifically interesting to me because it's almost the core of of why I started this business or why I started this podcast is because a lot of times, in deep tech, I mean, climate tech just happens to be my passion, but deep tech, it's a lot of really brilliant people that have, engineered or even invented in a lot of cases, a new way of doing something that's very, technical and a very elegant solution to something that's a critical issue in the world. A lot of times, those same people are not taught at any point in the journey how to run a business or be an entrepreneur, and a lot of entrepreneurship is sales and marketing, exactly what you're talking about. So I feel like, the the framework that you're laying is very, high level, efficient, ideal version of what go to market, what growth is, and for any business, but specifically in climate tech, I think it doesn't happen as much as it should. So, in your experience, if you could give one example of, a company that you worked with, audited, whatever, that was not doing it, as efficiently as possible, thought that they were, but was very clearly not after you engaged, and then either how that company transitioned to doing it more effectively or just another company that does do it, as effectively as you're speaking, just to ground this, in an example.
Yeah, I mean, it's so tough to get right because we're all starting with the problem, then building the product, then building the pilot phase for that product, and then eventually trying to scale that system. I think the biggest challenge is really honestly knowing which gate needs to be unlocked next, and in what order those gates need to be unlocked. Because let's say, and I'll use the example I'll use is a carbon accounting platform that I've been working with for some time, and this is a founder-led sales motion. It's a very deeply, like, very knowledgeable, very charismatic founder. can create a relationship with almost anyone, right? So there's no problem in like getting that meeting set up with the founder. There's going to be a good conversation. What they struggled with was after having all these positive initial conversations, so they're selling to mid-market and then sometimes the lower side of the enterprise, sustainability teams of 2 to 3 people selling this carbon accounting platform. They'd get into the conversations and they'd get into like the problems. There's climate disclosure laws that they need to be ready for. There's some timelines in place for that. And the conversations all went very well. Everything seemed to be going well until the vendor selection. So there's a proposal out. They're reviewing the options. They're reviewing the competitors. And every single time at that stage, the deal would drop. And there were over 15 of these scenarios where the deals would drop. And you look at that and it looks like a sales problem. It looks like there's a conversion rate problem between proposal to contract to deal one.
Mhm.
And so we try to solve that as a sales problem. We try to make better brochures, better sales assets, better ROI calculators to help build the business case for this product. When in reality, we were trying to solve the wrong problem. It wasn't a sales problem. It was a product market fit problem. It was that for somebody in that position, which has in carbon accounting such a competitive space, right? So many options you can go with. For the customers in that position, what they lacked was something personalized enough to their segment. So like if you're doing carbon accounting as a manufacturer, it's very different to if you're doing it as a healthcare provider or as a financial services provider. And the product I was working with was trying to do it for everyone. And that's why there was a lack of fit, right? So that's one of the that was one of the biggest inefficiencies that we had. We just struggled to see it until we came up to the point where we realized that the reason why none of them are going forward is because their compliance requirements aren't addressed by the general approach of the product. They needed something else specific.
So did you see in that example then, a great example, by the way, did you see them, not utilizing or optimizing maybe the distinct roles of marketing and sales in the way that you were speaking to? Is that why this, perpetuated for so long, this problem of theirs?
It's definitely about roles, but in this case, I'd say the role of product for sales was marketing. I think that was the cloudy part of the diagnostic, right? So we were not asking the question like, well, if product would change, how would that affect the sales process? And it's always got to come like product is at the top of that hierarchy, and then sales, and then marketing. And that's something that we didn't think to change or to play with that variable, and that was the
Wait,
biggest.
sorry, that was the structure that existed? Not or one that
That should
should exist?
like should have asked first, has the product been validated as a competitive solution in such a competitive space?
Okay.
Um,
Got it.
yeah,
And then you
does
would
that make sense?
ask about the and then if that's yes, then you would ask about sales, and then you would ask about marketing?
Yeah, and you
You
would
think
you would
about
kind
it?
of like it's kind of like positioning, messaging, delivery. It's like if your positioning is not stable, all the changes you make to messaging are built on an unstable foundation. And if the messaging's not stable, all the distribution challenges you're trying to solve are also not stable. So you kind of need to work back to the original.
Okay. Yeah, but this is so
And
good. So,
I'm curious,
another
what have you in
what
this,
have I, found as far as this goes? Well, I
yeah,
it's, the reason I get so excited about this is because it what I've found, um, I guess to answer your question in the same way that I was speaking to before is that just a number of times on this podcast, I've spoken to, let's just take a recent example of this guy, that started Membrion, let's say. So Membrion is a company. We'll shout out Greg. Membrion is an awesome company. It's been around for like 8 years or 10 years. They spun out of a university, and at the very beginning, they were PhD. It was a lab. They were doing really cool research on a new material that you could use for membranes in desalination in a number of different contexts. And so the original hypothesis that they had was that there was going to be, if I remember correctly, an application at either data centers or some type of center that's very energy intensive and has to do with the grid. Because there was a very specific application for that. But again, here goes the difference between the science and the entrepreneur brain. It took them a year and a half to realize that that market wasn't big enough. And they had a, I guess to go through hierarchy, they had a valid product and it fit this market, but it wasn't big enough to be able to support the growth of a real company. And it took 18 months for them to figure that out. And so it's not a direct, answer to your framework, your question, but I just feel like the more content that is out there around how to think about motions, growth motions, once you have an idea in climate tech, it really will, and we'll get to this, but it really will introduce an environment where you are really specific about how much waste is happening. Um, and it will help, companies like Membrion. Now they pivoted after that to wastewater treatment plants, like you mentioned before, and they've been extremely successful and so impactful in that space, and they've just taken off since then, um, which is just so cool. But to think that that could have happened earlier, or that there's a company now that's in the middle of that 18-month period that once they take your framework would be
Yeah,
like, oh wait, we're looking at the wrong market, or we're marketing in the wrong way, or we're selling in the wrong way, is really inspiring to me.
that's a tough
That's
problem to solve, right? Like some
right.
rabbit holes, it feels like some rabbit holes you need to go through and to see the end of the hole before you can come back out and say, well, okay, not that one.
Yes. Yeah, man, that's why this is so important. It is a tough issue to solve, and that's why you're gonna save a lot of people from that. So the last thing before we get to that mindset piece that I talked about, because I think that's also super important, is I have a note here to structure and prioritization of marketing outreach. So we're taking what you were saying and just tying a nice bow on it. So in practice, the correct way to do things, this framework, product sales, marketing, like how can we think about this tangibly? How do you actually work through this to get to a point where things are working?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Tangibly, we should go into an example of some kind. I think a good, just a good visual for this is just to think of it as like you've got different gates, right? And you're trying to ease the flow of water through these gates, right? And it's all about the order in which you're able to open the gates. So, for instance, like
Sorry, just
you
question.
have,
So I think if you had mentioned that carbon accounting company w- realized that they could be specific across industries. Is that an example of what you're saying with the different gates? Like they were able to move in there in
yeah,
industry specific?
that would be like like a competitive differentiation insight. Like you can't compete in the general market because the competitors will have like 10x, 20x the funding. But within that, there is an opportunity to work with a subsegment of the market where it's underserved, and therefore your product development can satisfy that problem. Like that was the realization was at the product level, really. Once that realization, if it's true, once that realization is made, then you open the product gate, then the sales gate becomes the next blocker. It's like, okay, well, how do you communicate that? And how do you repeatedly get people interested and get people trying the product, right? And then validating that assumption you had at the product. If that makes sense, it's kind of like being willing to go back to the previous gate if you're finding something's not opening up further down the line. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah, yeah. So, well, I like that. So let's just stick with it if it makes sense. So let's say hypothetically that carbon accounting company, they were trying to be too general. They looked at their product. They said it's not specific enough to the industry application. So then they edited their product however they did that, and let's say they chose manufacturing as an industry where they really wanted to move into. So then they opened up that gate. They said we have a product for manufacturing and we know it. It's validated. Now we go to sales. So you're saying all the how do we communicate this? So you get like sales copies, sales enablement. Like what does it look like for that gate to be lifted then?
Yeah, I think the gold in that part of the process is going to be having you have these calls, you're going to have these objections that are coming up on the calls, right? And each of those objections are essentially the market building your requirements document. So if you've been serving the segment for a while, you probably already know what it needs to be for manufacturers. But if it's your first time going out to that market, you're going to speak to the people that are buying, and they're going to start revealing that there are certain like operational complexities that you need to help them, right? So there's certain reporting styles that are unique to their way that the business operates. And if you can't report on that within your accounting, that's going to not be a good purchase for them. So every little objection that comes up in the sales process is essentially a product development queue, and that will feed you back. So in the early days, that's gold.
So then let's again say hypothetically, so you go through this process, you do outbound sales motions, you reach out to your network, you do a little bit of marketing with your high level hypotheses, you get to those conversations, you experience the objections, and you collect this data about how your product actually fits in this specific direction. So that gate, let's say hypothetically, sales gate is up. Now you're at marketing in this framework. So how do you address that?
So maybe you found within the objection collection process, maybe you found that there was a repeated misunderstanding about um, exactly the nature of the penalties that are coming for an organization that isn't able to act on this. Maybe people, like, let's say there's a climate disclosure law in California, SB 253, which applies to organizations of a certain size. It applies to organizations that are doing revenue or sales in California, or they're doing hiring in California, or they have a location in California. And it's very common for a sustainability team to, because of all the regulation they have to stay on top of, it's very common for them to miss some of the nuances of that. And it might come out in the sales process that someone will say, this is not a priority for us because we don't actually, we don't fit within the penalty. And if they're wrong about that, which is often the case because it's hard to stay on top of it, that objection is essentially a non-objection, right? It's one that they should already know that they're sitting within an area where they need to go and report for compliance. So that would be good marketing material, right? So to pre-educate people that actually, if you fit any of these requirements, it might not seem like it at first, but looking at the rules and how they define sales in California, you probably are on that list and you do need to know about it. So the marketing's role is then to educate the market till they get to the point where that's not an objection that the sales team is having to handle.
I just want you to keep going, man. This is just such good stuff. I'm laid back and I'm like, wow, this is my mind is really going. So it sounds like it's a lot. What we're laying out is a lot. And that's why there's a need for it. That's why both of us are doing what we're doing. How do you think about this stuff with the right mindset in order to uh, ask the right questions, get the right information, and grow your climate tech company effect.
Man, what a great, juicy, big question.
Yeah.
Man, I don't know. I guess
Well,
it depends what stage you're at, right?
well, you have I mean, you do. You've been releasing a lot of good content about specifically the road from Series A to Series B because there's a lot of companies that struggle with that. But you have a good catchphrase that I actually am excited because I haven't asked you about it yet, and I've been meaning to. What does zero waste? What does the mindset of zero waste mean?
Um, I mean, it's an idealistic. It's the idea that we could remove waste from all growth, right? Like if you have a company that's got revenue, or you've got a company that has investment, your goal, of course, would be to grow it to its potential without wasting a single dollar. That would be great. Um, in reality, there's always going to be a little bit of waste in everything that we do, but I think what we're all struggling with is understanding, like, what are the wastes that are unnecessary that we could cut? Like what are the things that are not learning or university fees that come with all campaigns that we launch? What are the things that we could completely sidetrack? Like what are the common mistakes that people have? And I think that that's like the essence of that is knowing what to do and in what order, because obviously exactly what you should be doing is going to be different based on, like, what do you know about your customers, what do you know about the product. Like this is such a deeply specialized question, but I think what we can all benefit from is sharing how we're doing at the different stages. If you're pre-seed or Series A and you don't have strong positioning, you don't have a strong website, you haven't articulated the solution very well, of course, running a giant marketing campaign is going to be a waste of money, because you're basically trying to feed a funnel that doesn't work yet. So that's an easy and extreme example. I think where it gets really hard is where, let's say you're sitting at Series A, you've already got some happy customers, you've got product market fit, people are staying with you for more than a year, so everything looks good. The question is, what's stopping us from growing right now? What's the next unlock that we need to release and to focus on? And I think that's where you have a lot of choices to make, and that's where it's helpful to look at how other people are doing it, like see in the space how others have grown, because often you're going to be making a decision between, like, do I use the channel primarily? If I'm selling to utilities, do I want to sell directly, or do I want to sell through existing vendors and do partnership model? Yeah, these are really, obviously, really big questions, and they can differ for everyone. In this case, I would say it just really, really helps to look around and to look at what other people are doing. Because if you want to figure that out yourself, it's going to come with a university fee, right?
Yes, exactly. That's why I would always defer to having people like you do it for me, because I'm not spending time doing that. But so if I was going to do it myself, which, thankfully, uh, I get to collaborate with you in doing. But if I was going to do it myself and I wanted to take a stab at it and, pay that university fee, um, we have in this mindset, you really want to focus on the sources of waste, like you're speaking to. Idealistically, you don't want any waste in your growth. Um, let's just focus on Series A, because you're putting out a lot of good content about that. You mentioned already a good example of usually where there is waste. But how would you, if you're running a Series A company, how would you look at things and you say, I want to approach, we want to grow. We just raised, we're heading towards Series B, or we have Series B in the horizon. We know we're going to do it. How would I look around and use this mindset? Because we laid out a great framework. How would you use this mindset to start asking the right questions? You did mention already, and I wrote it down, the correct order of operations to do things. So if we could just, tie things up with that. How do I use this mindset to ask the right questions, and what does it mean to do things in the right order of operations?
Okay, so let's use Series A then as that example.
Beautiful. Absolutely.
So you're sitting, yeah, I mean, you obviously you're sitting on some dry powder. You're sitting on a limited runway. You already have good recurring revenue, but your target's probably going to be a huge multiple of that, right? So, like, let's say you're sitting on a 5 million revenue target by the end of the year. The best, and this is not always information that everyone has available, but the best position from which to start that exercise is to look at that funnel. So you look at your closed won deals, look at the opportunities, you look at the proposals, you look at the sales qualified leads, and you look at the marketing leads, and you look at that whole that funnel, and you want to try and understand for each of those drop-off points, of which it's inevitable, right? You will always have drop-off in a funnel, but at which of those points are you above or below the benchmark? Because if you are, let's say, experiencing like an MQL drop-off, it's very common to see anything between 25 to 40% MQL to SQL. If you're seeing something in the range of 60, 70%, that is, yes, A, it is alarming, but B, it's an opportunity. There's probably an improvement you can make in that stage. So if you're looking at that and you're saying, okay, well, I'm supposed to hit 10 million, but of that 10 million, I'm losing 2 million between these two stages. If I'm forecasting forward based on the current drop-offs that I'm seeing, then that should galvanize you to be able to really put resource in that part of the funnel. And, like, practically speaking, if you have a low MQL conversion, it's most likely it's going to come down to targeting. It's going to come down to looking at which of the MQLs that moved to SQL that was successful and that eventually became closed won, what are the attributes that they shared? Take that as a segment out of your CRM and look at the difference between the ones that don't close to the ones that do close. Run that analysis and see, well, if I just targeted the people, are there some patterns? If I just targeted those ones that did make it to closed won, would it change my targeting at the top of the funnel? And if it does, then that's definitely an experiment, worth running. But
So
yeah,
then this framework from earlier where we went product, sales, marketing, does that exist at Series A still? Because there's more of an understanding between your product and, with the successful closed clients, revenue, things like this. Does that framework still exist at Series A? Or is there a different order of operations to take, like you were speaking to?
yeah, great question. I mean, you should probably have a very stable core, like, anchor product, right? That is now stable because you've got those recurring customers. So the product should be stable. But I think where that will come back in again is if you're trying to go, maybe you've got mid-market, you're trying to go into the enterprise segment. That's an entirely new realization of the same product, right? The product's going to have to go through some changes to service a new segment. And that would apply even if you're going out into a new industry segment, a new company size, maybe a new buyer as well. So there's all kinds of ways that Series A, and I've seen this a few times with Series A companies, they'll get to Series A with product market fit in a certain segment. But when they want to get to Series B, they need to expand that. Maybe they're seeing, oh, we had really good success, but we were sitting on a 10K average contract value with the first segment, and they wanted to get to 50K. To get to that, they're gonna have to make some new sales motions. Probably gonna need some new product customization for that as well.
That would return to the doing things in the right order
Yeah, and it refreshes that
conversation.
whole process. Yeah.
Well, I think the signal of a good conversation is when you're left with more questions than answers. And when the questions that you have are, an elevated version of the ones that you came in with, which is what happened for me. I learned, like I said, I wrote down these things. These are not just really important and relevant for climate tech companies, but I think any person, any company looking to grow, I think this framework is really useful. So selfishly, I will be listening back to this episode while simultaneously pushing out content saying, how can this apply to my company? And I was thinking about um, how to ask this because we're doing multiple episodes. You've answered this question a couple times now, so I'm going to ask you a different version. What inspires you about the work that you've done recently um, with your clientele and your team?
Um, yeah, I mean, honestly, working with people that are very passionate about what they're doing and the way that I've seen that the best operators are usually the most, like, they're actually the most humble ones. The ones that are doing the greatest work are the ones that are able to, like, have an idea, ship the idea, put it in market, see it fail, and then very quickly ask those tough questions like, why would this have failed? What could I have been wrong about, and what can I do differently? And we see that in the kind of stuff like we were talking about now, which is like big, big questions of positioning, big questions of does the product solve the problem, but it also filters all the way down to you run a marketing campaign and you have these ideas that these are the value propositions that the audience really cares about. And maybe you think they care about, like, financial forecasting is the most important thing for an energy business management platform. And we all feel very strong about this. And this really makes sense to the research that we've been doing. And you go to market with that messaging and you test it and you realize that no matter how hard you want it to work, it's not what people are buying with. They're not engaging in that content. So that's that process of constantly going forward, putting out the message, seeing the results, and then asking the question, like, are we maybe wanting this to be the case more than it really is the case? Are we getting different signals? Um, and what inspires me, like, there's an example recently where we did have that idea where we were very certain that this was what the market is going to bite on. This is going to be the most attractive value proposition. When in reality, it was much more simple. It was really just time saving for the very overworked buyers that were working with the product. And it seems like such a downgrade in product vision that you're only selling the time saving. But once you've sold it on the time saving, you can then sell them on all the other beautiful features that exist. It just took us, getting down from the the positioning pedestal, getting down from this like big grand vision of what it could be to just asking the question like, okay, so what's going to cause someone to start a demo of the product today? And that process, it's really fun, right? It's really inspiring and kind of keeps you on your toes.
So a very tangible example of this framework that we were talking about today.
Test and learn and be willing to be wrong. Yeah, as many times as
Yeah.
you.
I always enjoy these conversations, Evan. So I'll take as many of these as I can get, and I know I have more questions for you. But for today, I appreciate you walking through this framework. I'm very excited to get it out to the people. I think if anyone would like to take this and apply it to their own company, it would be helpful, and then they'd realize, oh my God, there's so much to do. I need help. But at least they'd be able to ask the right questions relative to just waiting 18 months to find that there's a different market that you should enter. So I really appreciate all the conversation, man. Thank you for this
Appreciate
episode.
you. Thanks for the questions. Thanks for the ideas. It's always so exciting and it's like so stimulating. And I'm gonna have just like a buzz after this conversation, which I always appreciate
Oh,
that.
you got it. Well, enjoy your day.
Likewise. See you soon.